Do you know there's a hospital in the Nevada, United States, high desert that isn't on any map you can buy? If you drive the service road looking for it, you'll pass it twice, maybe 3 times, before you realize the water tower with no name on it is the only landmark for 11 miles, and that the solar farm behind the chain link fence has never once been connected to the grid. I worked there for 4 months and 2 weeks. In that time, I watched a man convince a room full of trained professionals that he was already dead. I watched a woman drown a building full of people without ever leaving her chair. And I found out, far too late to matter, that the person I trusted most inside that building had stopped being that person a long time before I ever showed up. They called it Ridgeline Behavioral. On paper, it's a research annex for a defense contractor nobody's heard of, which is exactly the kind of paperwork you want when you're hiding 6 floors that officially don't exist. I'm not going to tell you the real name of the facility, or the county it's in, or the name I used while I worked there. What I'm going to tell you is what happened to patient 12, and why. If you ever get offered a job interviewing people who supposedly can't hurt you, you should ask a lot more questions before you say yes. I'd spent 6 years studying coercive persuasion before Ridgeline ever called me. Cult exit counseling, mostly. Helping people claw their way back to themselves after someone else had spent years rearranging what they believed. It's slow work. It's also the closest thing academia has to combat. So when a recruiter reached out about a confidential behavioral research position, government adjacent, 6 figures, relocation covered, my first thought wasn't this sounds like a fever dream. My first thought was finally, someone's gonna pay me what I'm worth. The interview took place in a hotel conference room in Reno. No windows, just me, a folding table, and a woman named Dr. Okafor who introduced herself as the facility's clinical director. She was maybe 60, silver-haired, dressed like she'd rather be anywhere else. She asked me exactly 4 questions. Have you ever been hypnotized? Do you get seasick? Do you have family who would notice if you work somewhere with no cell signal for weeks at a time? Are you afraid of the dark, or only of what might be in it? I laughed at that last one. She didn't. We're not being cute, she said. Answer honestly. It matters for placement. I told her the truth, that I wasn't afraid of the dark itself, just uncertain about what might be occupying it. She wrote something down, closed a folder, and told me I'd start in 3 weeks. Nobody mentioned the word patient. Wasn't quite the right word for what I'd be doing. Nobody mentioned that some of the people on my caseload hadn't been born the way the rest of us were born, or that some of them hadn't, strictly speaking, stayed dead. That came later. That came on day 1. Ridgeline looks, from above, like an ordinary regional medical center that ran out of funding halfway through construction. That's on purpose. The real facility is underneath. 6 sublevels connected by a single freight elevator that requires 2 staff badges scanned within 4 seconds of each other to move at all. My escort on day 1 was an orderly named Castillo, broad-shouldered, easy laugh, the kind of guy you trust to carry your furniture. He walked me through the badge protocol like he was reciting a grocery list he'd said 1,000 times. Sublevel 1 and 2 are administrative. 3 is general population, mostly people the county courts didn't know what to do with. 4 is where you'll work. 5 and 6 you don't have clearance for, and you're gonna want to keep it that way. What's on 5 and 6? I asked. Castillo's easy laugh didn't quite reach his eyes that time. Older problems, he said. Ones we haven't solved yet. The elevator dropped for what felt like twice as long as it should have. When the doors opened onto sublevel 4, the air changed, colder, and carrying a faint mineral smell I couldn't place, like a cave that had never seen sunlight. Welcome to the quiet ward, Castillo said. That's not the official name. It's just what everyone calls it, because you'll notice, nobody in here screams. Not even when you'd expect them to. I asked him why. Because screaming doesn't get you anything in here, he said. They figured that out faster than most of us did. My caseload was 12 names. Dr. Okafor had briefed me the day before. I was to conduct structured interviews, law of behavioral responses, and under no circumstances offer a patient anything, information, sympathy, or a promise, without prior written approval. They will try to make a deal with you, she'd said. Every single one of them. Eventually, the moment you accept, you've told them everything they need to know about how to get out. Patient 4 was first on my list. A thin, unassuming man named Dorian who'd been picked up outside Flagstaff 11 years earlier after neighbors reported he hadn't aged in over 3 decades. He was polite, quiet. He answered my questions about time perception with the patience of a man who'd genuinely never been in a hurry in his life. "You'll get to the interesting ones eventually," he told me, almost gently, as the guards led him back to his cell. "Try not to enjoy it as much as you're going to." I didn't think much of that comment until I met patient 9. Her file said her name was Rosalind. Her intake photo showed a woman in her 30s with an unremarkable, forgettable face. The kind you'd walk past in a grocery store without a second glance. In person, that face did something the photograph hadn't captured. It changed subtly moment to moment, like she was still deciding what it looked like. "You're new," she said, before I'd even sat down. Her voice had a strange double quality, like two people speaking a half second out of sync. They always send the new ones to me first. I think it's a test, to see how fast you figure out what to be afraid of. I asked her what she meant. She smiled, and for one disorienting second, the smile on her face was mine. "Everyone in this building is wearing something," she said. "Some of us just admit it." That was the day I learned Rosalind wasn't fey or gifted or supernatural in any of the tidy categories the intake files like to use. Rosalind was a mimic, something that had, at some point in life none of us could verify, stopped having a face of its own and started borrowing everyone else's. The staff kept a strict rule about her. No mirrors, no reflective surfaces, and absolutely no one was allowed to describe what they looked like out loud in her presence. I broke that rule exactly once, 3 weeks later, and it nearly cost me everything. Patient 12 was the name at the bottom of my list, and the one nobody on staff would discuss without lowering their voice. Officially, his file read, "Cause of containment, unknown, threat classification maximum. Do not offer physical contact under any circumstance." Unofficially, Castillo told me the story over coffee one night in the break room. The way you tell a ghost story, you don't quite believe yourself. They found him at the bottom of a reservoir in Colorado back in the 90s, he said. Nobody knows how long he'd been down there. Divers said the water around him was warmer than it should have been, like someone was still, I don't know, running underneath, keeping him from freezing solid. When they pulled him out, he wasn't breathing. No pulse. Should have been a body, not a patient. So what happened? He opened his eyes on the autopsy table, sat up, asked the coroner real polite if he could borrow a phone. Castillo shook his head. We've had him 9 years. He's never once raised his voice, never once tried to escape. He just waits. And every doctor who's ever spent more than a month talking to him ends up asking for a transfer. I asked why. Because he's patient, Castillo said, and didn't elaborate on whether that was a description or a warning. I met patient 12 for the first time on a Tuesday. He sat calmly behind reinforced glass in a room lit dim enough that I had to let my eyes adjust before I could make out his features. An older man, gray at the temples, dressed in the same plain intake clothes as everyone else, hands folded on the table like he was waiting for a job interview of his own. "Dr. Okafor said you'd be coming," he said, before I'd introduce myself. She always tells me when someone new is starting. I think she hopes it'll rattle me, knowing that I know. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. "I want to talk about what you're afraid of losing," he said. "Everyone who sits in that chair is afraid of losing something. It's the only interesting thing about any of you." I told him I wasn't there to talk about myself. He smiled, patient, unbothered, exactly the way Castillo had described. That's what they all say, right up until they remember what it cost them to walk away from something they loved. Then they come back and sit in that chair again, and they ask me if I can help. I should have ended the interview there. I know that now. Instead, I asked him, carefully, clinically, the way I'd been trained to ask cult survivors about what they'd once believed, what exactly he was offering people. "Nothing you don't already want to give away," he said. "I don't take. I only ever hold what's offered. That's the part nobody in this building understands. I'm not the dangerous one. Doctor, I'm just very, very good at waiting for the dangerous ones to make their first mistake." 6 weeks in, something changed. It started small. A guard on sublevel 3 reported hearing 2 voices coming from patient 4's cell when the logs clearly showed he'd been alone. A junior researcher on my team, a nervous young man named Whitfield, started showing up to meetings a half step behind everyone else's conversation, laughing at jokes that hadn't quite finished landing. I noticed because I spent 6 years training myself to notice exactly that kind of thing. The half-second delay of someone repeating words that weren't originally theirs. I brought it to Dr. Okafor. She didn't dismiss me, which frightened me more than if she had. "How long has Whitfield had contact with patient 9? She asked. "Rosalind? He does her intake logs. Maybe 20 minutes a day." Dr. Okafor was quiet for a long moment. "Get him reassigned. Today. And do not, under any circumstances, ask him why he's being reassigned." I didn't listen. Not fully. That night, I found Whitfield in the break room and asked him, gently, if everything was all right. He looked at me, and for just a moment, his forgettable, ordinary face rearranged itself into something that wasn't quite his own. A woman's smile, briefly layered under his. "Everyone in this building is wearing something," he said, in Rosalind's double voice. "Some of us just admit it." Then he blinked and it was gone, and he asked me, in his own voice this time, why I was staring at him like that. I told him it was nothing. I went home that night and didn't sleep because I'd finally understood what Rosalind's containment protocol was actually protecting us from. It wasn't her face people needed protecting from. It was the idea that she could leave a copy of herself behind in anyone who looked at her long enough. And that copy could sit quietly inside a person for weeks, waiting, before it ever did anything at all. 3 days later, sublevel 4 flooded, not with water, with silence. An entire floor of guards and researchers going dark on the radio within the same 4-minute window. No alarms, no screaming. Exactly the way Castillo had once described the ward's strange, terrible calm. I was in my office when the lockdown sirens finally caught up to what had already happened. Dr. Okafor's voice came over the intercom, steady in a way that told me she rehearsed this exact tone for exactly this exact day. "This is not a drill. All non-security personnel report to Safe Room 2. Do not open your door for anyone who cannot answer the day's passphrase. I repeat, do not open your door." I made it to Safe Room 2 behind a cluster of terrified interns. Castillo was already there, rifle across his knees, face gray. "What happened?" I asked him. "Whitfield," he said. He let Rosalind's copy run in his head long enough that it finally learned the guard rotation. He opened 4 cells personally. Nobody even noticed him do it. He was just Whitfield, doing his job the whole time. "And patient 12? Castillo didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. He didn't need anyone to open his door, he said. He's been asking people for 9 years what they're afraid of losing. Somebody, somewhere in this building, finally told him, and that's all he ever needed. I never saw patient 12 leave his cell. Nobody did, on camera or off. What the security footage showed, in the seconds before every screen on sublevel 4 went dark at once, was simply this. The door to his room standing open, the room behind it empty, and for one single frame. No more than that, the shape of a man standing directly behind the camera itself, as if he'd been in the room with whoever was watching the whole time. 3 people are dead by official count. I know that number is a lie, because it doesn't include Whitfield, and it doesn't include whatever is left of the person Whitfield used to be, walking around somewhere out there, wearing his face like a coat he borrowed and never gave back. Dr. Okafor kept her job. Ridgeline is still operating, as far as I know, quietly patching a hole in the floor and rewriting the incident report to protect people like me from ever having to explain what actually happened. I quit 2 weeks later. I told them it was for personal reasons. They didn't ask any more questions than that, which told me they already understood exactly why I was leaving. I think about patient 12's question more than I'd like to admit. Were you afraid of losing? I used to think that was a threat. Now I think it might have been the only honest thing anyone in that building ever said to me. Because the truth is, I still don't know my own answer. And some nights, I lie awake wondering if that's exactly the kind of uncertainty he's still out there, patiently waiting to collect.